Welcome everyone. I can see people joining, so I'm just going to let more people join and then we'll get going. Welcome to this Sustain webinar. We've got people flooding in, all joining at different times, so I'm just going to sit here and smile and I'll do the introduction as soon as it's kind of steadied off in terms of attendees. Magic. And it looks like it is, so I'm safe to start. So hi everyone, welcome to this Sustain webinar on how community organising can sow the seeds for a strong, diverse food movement. We are very pleased to see you here today, and my name is Cecily Spelling and I'm coordinator at Sustain, and I'm going to be your chair for the session alongside an excellent panel, if I do say so myself, of speakers who are going to be talking about their community organising work. So I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. I know we're 16 months into this, but it's still good practice. So for those that are unaware, this is a webinar on Zoom. It's a Zoom webinar, so you are only going to be able to see the panelists, not the other attendees. But you can still talk to the other attendees via the chat box. The chat box is still there as it would be in any other Zoom meeting, so please make use of that. Talk to each other, introduce yourselves, say where you're from, what organisation you're joining from today if you are, and where you're dialing in from as well, because it's great to see a geographical spread when we're all living in the virtual world still at the minute a little. And please do make sure that when you use the chat box, you are addressing it to all panelists and all attendees, because I've been caught out by that before. So sometimes messages just go to the panelists when really you're trying to speak to another attendee. So just be aware of that. Also, there is a Q&A box at the bottom, kind of next to the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And this is where you can put questions for the panelists for the Q&A. So please do try and put all of your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat box, because as you can see, the chat box can get quite busy with everyone having so much fun saying hello. So we don't want to lose your questions, so please put them in the Q&A and we will get to them when we have our question and answer session with the panelists themselves, and some of them might be able to be answered live by the panelists in written form, so do make use of that. The session is being recorded and it will be shared on the Sustain website afterwards and via Eventbrite email. I'll be sending that out tomorrow morning, so everyone else you can share it with anyone that you think might find it useful. So with housekeeping out of the way, this webinar has been made possible today thanks to support from the National Lottery Community Fund. The lottery do a huge amount of work supporting communities to organise and grow around the UK, and that is especially true of the food and farming sector. We're very lucky in that respect, and I think it's safe to say that our sector is a bit of a growing bed of organisers. And we're lucky today to be joined by a few of those organisations that are doing some excellent community organising work, who are coming together to share what they're doing, the tactics that they're using, and to discuss how we can all support community. We can all do community organising to grow a diverse food movement. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. And I must add that unfortunately Natasha is only able to join us for this her presentation, but we will have a few minutes for questions afterwards. So if you have questions specifically about Natasha's presentation, please put them in the Q&A as she's speaking, so we can get to those at the end of her presentation, and then we'll move straight on into the other sessions. So without further ado, Natasha, who is a co-founder of Organising for Change, which is a training collective, please, over to you.
Thanks, Cecily, and hi everyone. So yeah, as Cecily said, I'm co-founder of Organising for Change, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about what is community organising. I will talk a little bit about how you can use it in the food movement, but only briefly. There's an amazing panel of other speakers that are going to talk about their experience of doing this work and share some really interesting stories. So yeah. Organising for Change is not just me, it's also Tatiana Garavito and Catherine Wall. Catherine is actually doing a PhD where she's looking at land and race and doing some really, really interesting work. It's a shame she couldn't be here because she has a lot more of a direct connection with the food movement. But yeah, that's our statement of intent. We are a training collective. We also do strategic consultancy work, and we've been going for about 4 years now. We run lots of trainings on organising. Our weekend training on organising is like 2.5 days to give an introduction. So this is going to be a very, very brief introduction in 10 minutes, but I will do the best I can with it. So what is organising? Some really key sort of bullet point things that I think are important to know about organising. Listening is really central, and it's about listening to communities. That doesn't have to be geographical communities, it can also be communities of interest, communities of identity, all of those sorts of things. Also, really is a type of people power action for social change that centres relationships and trust. So people often say that organising moves at the speed of trust. So it's not slow, it's not fast, but it is very powerful. Also really centres collective decision making, and it builds collective power. And at the centre of all of that, relationships, trust, listening is a co-created and a positive culture. Culture is really, really important because it weaves in with all of those other things. So I wanted to contrast 2 different approaches to people-powered change, which are mobilising and organising. And I'm using the definition of these that Dr. Harry Hahn gives, who is an American academic who's written several books about organising. This isn't sort of definitive, but this is one way of looking at mobilising and organising. That mobilising is all about engaging a self-selecting population. So it's about giving actions from the centre that are easy for people to take part in, and they'll come to and find those actions if they're already interested in what you're doing. So it could be something like signing a petition, it could be something like turning out to a demonstration, it might be something that takes a lot more energy, but the thing with this is that the actions are coming from your organisation, from some kind of centre, and that people are just coming and participating in them. Organising, on the other hand, is much more about building agency, so building motivation and capacity of a community to engage. So this is more about, it can be much more about getting people who aren't already interested in your issue involved by building relationships and trust with them, by listening to communities. And the way that organising normally works is you invite people to step into their own power. So you basically support them to take on their own leadership for what you're working on. And yeah, I just wanted to contrast organising with mobilising. I'm going to show you a couple of tables. I'm not going to talk through them, but this is a way of contrasting the two approaches. So the strategy for building power and mobilising is you build membership and you take people where they are. In organising, it's all about building leadership and transforming people's capability. And the results right at the bottom, with mobilising, you get a real breadth of support. With organising, you can get a real depth of support. Also looking at the kind of the rationale, the call to action. With mobilising, a lot of the time it's people act when the benefits outweigh the costs. So particularly with things like online campaigning, you get people talking about collectivism and how to make actions really, really easy for people to take. But with organising, activism is a product of social interaction. So you're creating a sense of independence. Measures of success with mobilising might be the numbers taking a particular action. With organising, it might be more like the transformation in people's actual capacity. And yeah, there's a lot more that I could say about this, but it's just to give you an idea of the sort of differences between those two. And I would also say that it's not that mobilising is a bad thing. Like, there's lots of people talking about organising now saying it's great, but I think it has become a problem when loads of social change focused work is focused on just mobilising people and not organising, because you're getting the same group of people to take action again and again, and you're normally getting the people that already feel like they have agency in the system to be taking action with the sort of campaigns that NGOs run, and you're not building power in the way that I think we really often do need to achieve the change we want. So talking about organising and as well, it's also really important, I think, to think about power. The reason that I became really interested in organising was entirely about power. So just to introduce 2 models of power really briefly, there's one idea of power which is monolithic, the idea that someone in charge of an institution has power over, has the real power, and that yeah, to make a change, you need to kind of convince them or leverage something with them to get them to make the change. Conversely, you've got this idea of pluralistic power or power with. So that's the idea that somebody might be in charge of, you know, an institution or a nation state or whatever it is, but they are governing with, because the power flows from the people to them. So they're governing with the consent of people broadly. And actually you can, by, you know, by tackling things like norms and myths and laws and institutions, you can take that power away. And you can build power with people. And this idea of power with is really fundamentally at the heart of organising. The idea that you're building more power for your issue, and that if you bring people together to increase their agency, you can increase your power together. Mobilising is often about leveraging the power that you have already got with decision makers, whereas organising is often about building more power with others. Just to share a quote from Dr. Hari Han, who I really love, she says that movements build power not by selling people products they already want, but instead by transforming what people think is possible. And this really moves me, because I think that, yeah, the transformational power of organising is really, really strong. And a lot of the issues that we face, we really need to reimagine what is possible. And it's hard to do that within the confines of the system as it is without organising, honestly. A couple more things before I finish. This is a piece of work that I did not with Organising for Change, but with Tectonica. I did a report on the state of digital organising in Europe with them last year. And we came up with this model for thinking about different stages of mobilising and organising and communications. And a lot of people have said that they found it really helpful to see where their work fits on this spectrum. So there are two axes. The one going up is personalisation of relationship, and then the one going across is decentralisation of decision making. So to begin with, you've got communications, which is really, really kind of just one way. The decisions are made centrally and you're just broadcasting out. Then you move into mobilising, and there are different layers of this. So recruitment, list building and engagement, organisational audience segmentation and organisation directed activism. These are all digital terms, but they can apply to things that are happening offline and in a myriad of different ways as well. But the mobilising is about the organisation, much more directing things. There's a bit more of a personalisation of relationship, but then you move into organising, you've got support-based organising, and then fully decentralised organising is where it's all about personal relationships and people are making the decisions for themselves. And then the last thing that I wanted to share was some ethnographic research that I came across, which I thought was really interesting, which divided basically people that are running local campaigns into two different groups. So the first one was activism as identity. The majority of this group are white middle class people driven by a sense of meaning making, and their involvement is part of what makes them feel like they're engaging in good moral work. And then the second group was activism for impact. So majority working class and ethnic minorities, global majority folk, much more grounded in improving the material and social conditions in their communities, because they recognise that those communities are being deeply impacted. And I think that this is a really, really important distinction to draw. And I would say that, like a lot of mobilising, it really does mobilise these majority middle class white activists who are doing it because of it being connected to their self-identity. But actually, when you're doing things for impact, you need to be working with everyone, and you need to be involving people that have immediate experience of things, and for them to be leading the work. And I think that organising can be a really powerful tool to do that. So yeah, I'm sure Cecily will share these slides with you. That was a really, really quick whip through, but I will stop there so we have time for some questions and to hear from everyone else.
Thanks so much, Natasha. Not an easy ask putting 2-day training into a 10-minute presentation, but you did it. Thank you. We don't have any questions in the Q&A, so please, attendees, if you do have questions, please whack them in there and we can get to them. I do have a question in terms of kind of the mobilizing aspect of what you've talked about, the organising versus mobilizing, do you think that, you know, proportionally, when we talk about community organising, how many people do you think that they're doing community organising but are actually doing mobilising, and what do you see the impact of that being?
I think that organising became a bit of a buzzword and something that people got quite excited about, and suddenly you saw loads of job titles going up as organisers. But I think people quite often think that just working with people offline means that you're organising, and a lot of the time they're not, and they're still doing things that are coming directly from NGOs. And I don't know, I think it's quite damaging. I know that it's personally been distressing for people who got involved with projects because they thought they would be organising and then found that they weren't, and it wasn't really addressing power. And I think that big NGOs need to have a real conversation about whether they're actually up for doing this, because it involves rethinking power and rethinking how they work. And it is quite a big commitment to do organising. I have been doing a load of work with the Trussell Trust on their food bank network, because they're gearing up to be starting to recruit local organisers in food banks. And that's been quite a long process of talking to them about thinking through what it actually means and getting different bits of the organisation to try and get comfortable with the idea of like giving power to the network for people to do whatever they want that comes out of it. I mean, I'm not sure how well that will work, we will see, but it's been an interesting project.
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. And I just put the link to Organising for Change in the chat as well, because someone was asking where they can access the 2-day training. And just one more question whilst we have you, and then we'll move straight on. But I think some people are saying that they're probably guilty of activism as identity to some extent. So how do we move to the second type?
I don't think that there's anything necessarily inherently wrong with activism as identity. It's just if that dominates everything. And I think like you need to be building relationships across difference with other people and working alongside them and supporting people with different experiences to come to the fore and lead things.
Yeah, amazing. All right. Thank you so much, Natasha, for your time, for your presentation, and thanks to everyone for their questions. There are a few in there if you want to just write your responses. But yeah, we'll move on now. So thank you, everyone. Next up, we have Josh Virasamy from the Women's Environment Network, who'll be talking about their Just Fact programme. So Josh, over to you.
Hi, sorry, tech stuff. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm from WEN, the Women's Environmental Network, and I'm going to be speaking quite quickly about a program that we're running in Tower Hamlets over 5 years and try and weave in some ideas around how we're incorporating kind of organizing praxis theory into our work. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Great.
Looks good.
Cool. Right. Cool. So my name is Joshua Virasamy. I'm a program mobilizer with the Just Fact program. Just Fact stands for Just Food and Climate Transition. Work out when I said Women's Environmental Network, we're based in Tower Hamlets. So Just Food and Climate Transition. So the program came out of a proposal that was created by a number of organizations in Tower Hamlets coming together. It's led by the Women's Environmental Network, but it has lots of other partners involved. And it's funded by the lottery. The idea is kind of a 5-year program that works to develop a blueprint for a sustainable and socially just urban food system at the level of the borough. It's very ambitious. Sometimes I'm wondering what the hell we're trying to do, but we're giving it a good go, and we're working with a number of partners. And so I'm one of 2 mobilizers that was hired. There's a few people that were hired to kind of get the program going. Some of you might have encountered Elle in a different Sustain event. She's one of the managers. But what I'm going to do in this presentation is kind of whistle-stop tour of what the program is, to try and leave some time to speak about how organizing might relate to this. And it's funny to hear about the mobilizing aspect, because obviously my job title is program mobilizer. So hopefully I'm going to speak to that kind of tension between mobilizing and organizing. Very aware that I have 7 minutes. So why why Just Food and Climate Transition. For the Women's Environmental Network, as well as a lot of our partners, we see the issues we're encountering with the food system as systemic. We see that the high levels of, as the slide demonstrates, the high levels of economic insecurity, the fact that we have communities being further marginalized by food insecurity, all of these things demand that we have to take a really deep, long systemic approach and think about how we kind of overhaul the food system, which is why we went for a 5-year program and why we thought about it at the scale we're thinking about. I wish I had time to kind of go more into what the principles of just transition are, but maybe I can send some resources afterwards. Why focus on food? The Women's Environmental Network, when food is kind of the bread and butter of a lot of work that we do within Tower Hamlets. We run a food pantry, we run various community gardens, we run like cooking courses, growing courses. Food is like very much, we see it as kind of very much at the heart of the community. It's a big part of local culture. It's a big part of what brings people together. We've really successfully run a lot of community events through using food. And we recognize that food and the food system, as I'm sure many of you here know, is responsible for a lot of carbon emissions. And so being able to think about production and distribution and waste really deeply and think about how do we transform that at the level of the borough can have a huge impact on emissions and really impact climate, fight against climate change. So just really quickly, I guess some of the impacts that we're hoping to achieve through the program is we're hoping to reduce CO2 emissions. We're working with the local council who themselves have kind of acknowledged the severity of the issue and have a net zero target for 2050. So we're working closely with them as well as housing providers and as well as lots of other groups. And we're going to be measuring how CO2 emissions change over time. There's a whole bunch of different projects that I'll speak on a little bit as we go on that will be working to reduce CO2 emissions. We'll be thinking a lot more about how we have a resilient food system that's designed by the community. So there's a whole bunch of projects through what I will go into the various aspects of the program so there'll be like things about how we think about plastic use. There'll be things engaging people to think about how we do composting. There'll be cooking and growing programs, and all of those will be an opportunity for people to contribute to this overall program. And as I'm speaking, I'm like, oh, it's such a big program. How do I speak about this 5-year thing in 5 minutes? But I'm going to go into a bit more of the kind of minutiae of it in a second. And yeah, of course, part of this is that we're connected to Sustain and we're connected to lots of other food movements around the country. And we see this as building a stronger food movement and kind of giving, and we're going to be sharing a lot of our experiences with other organizations and talking about what we learn as we go. Who knew that talking so fast would make you get a dry mouth? Right, so 3-tiered approach that we're taking with this. And it's interesting because I guess our methodology isn't necessarily one of community organizing. We are thinking about policy change. So we are thinking about, I guess, mobilizing and organizing are 2 parts of 3 things that people talk about when they think about change, and the third one is advocacy. And policy change is very much kind of advocacy at that level, but community-led systems is another methodology we're thinking, the thing that I mentioned about people contributing to and the community leading the ideas and the praxis around building a new food system and individual action. So you can kind of see this with this image here, that actually the methodology is very much a kind of hybrid of organizing, mobilizing and advocacy. Okay, this is kind of the details of it. So so we have community hubs, which are 3 estate-based places where there's like a youth hub, there's like a hub that's around climate action that's based on 1 estate, and the third hub is a hub that actually, when it's running, where we're going to be having a food pantry and we're going to be doing lots of cooking courses. We have community labs. There's 5 funded so far, and they're doing a whole number of things, from like working with local traders to think about plastic use on the markets, to doing training courses with some of the really successful food cooperatives in Tower Hamlets and think about how do we scale food cooperatives, to actually developing anaerobic digesters that can actually produce compost by taking food waste in the community. Lots of different kind of techniques and tactics of lots of different ways of thinking about the structures of the food system and how we can innovate and make it more sustainable and socially just. And then really the brain of the program is this thing, the Blueprint Architects, which is 30 people from the community that are really diverse group of people. They're all already here now, and they meet 4 times a year. They come together, they share their experiences of the food system. They share their experiences of living in Tower Hamlets. They are in communication with the hubs and the labs. So kind of there's this symbiotic relationship where they're learning about what's happening around them with these kind of exciting new projects. They're also working with another forum that we set up called the Just Fact Forum, which is people who are kind of experts in their field. So people who work in the council, people academics, people who work for food organizations or work within the food system. And the Blueprint Architects are kind of in conversation with the forum. They're doing research over 5 years. They're speaking to the labs and the hubs. They're developing their knowledge. They're using their experiences, and they're kind of like, they're actually going to be developing this blueprint, which is going to be an actual blueprint at the end of the 5 years, which kind of demonstrates how we might make a transition to a socially just food system. I don't really have that much time to go into what the different hubs are, but just safe to say that there's the Climate Task Force that I mentioned, which is based on one estate, Leaders in Community, which is a really amazing youth charity in Tower Hamlets that do incredible work. So, for example, what they're doing within the program right now is working with 8 young people, training, like giving them training in climate campaigning and training them to become like young climate leaders in the community. And then the Limburg Community Hub is, that's where that picture is that you can see there. It's a hub, it's a space where there's going to be a food pantry and where there's going to be lots of cooking and growing that's going to be taking place. And then these are all the labs, but really don't have time to get into them, unfortunately. The blueprint I kind of already explained. That's that kind of symbiotic thing that I was speaking about. I'm going to try and get through to this bit. Right, so sorry for whizzing through really quick. So organizing tools and ideas. I guess it's important to say at this point that although I think the program is kind of mostly grounded in principles of mobilizing. So as I said, I'm called the program mobilizer, and we don't really have a wholly conscious kind of organizing approach, like say other organizations like Organising for Change or some of the other unions that we know that are really thinking about organizing. The ideas of kind of mobilizing, or what I guess some people call the technology of turnout, the things that Natasha spoke about, how we get people out, is still very much part of what we're trying to do. We are trying to turn out members in our community that have been part of what we've done in the past. But we are also thinking about how we reach out to members of the community that are either jaded when it comes to thinking about what the possibilities are for transforming the food system, or not bothered, don't really, are kind of disinterested. The kind of deep organizing techniques that Natasha spoke about do fit into some parts of the program. And I personally believe that having a blended approach with a focus on organizing is kind of key. So like some people speak about the civil rights movement as a great example of organizing, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is a really good example of organizing. But I look at the civil rights movement and think that actually they did lots of deep organizing. They did lots of this idea called spade work, lots of meetings, lots of relationship building with community leaders, lots of developing leaders. Some of those leaders went on to become very powerful people. Stockley Carmichael founded the Black Power movement. He was one of their developed leaders. They also did loads of mobilizing. They just turned tens of thousands of people out to demonstrations, and they kind of fill the jail cell strategy that they had. That was lots of mobilizing. They also did direct advocacy. Martin Luther King met with the president himself and like advocated on behalf of the movement. And I think the strength of the movement was that blended approach. So I think there's a big hype around organizing, which is really excellent, but I think we shouldn't lose focus of having a blended approach, especially right now where we're pretty much one generation away from climate catastrophe. Okay, so the first thing is organizing and organization. I guess a lot of people, when they think about organizing, they're thinking about how you develop a broad and deep organization. I've got here a quote from Rodrigo Nunes, who has this new book called Neither Vertical Nor Horizontal, a theory of political organization. And he has this idea, which I think is really cool, which is, it's called thinking organization ecologically. which means to say, like, oftentimes we're thinking about our organization and how we're doing our mobilizing, how we're doing our organizing, how we're doing our strategies, how we're turning out our people. And we kind of forget that we always exist in a very connected ecology of organizations. And actually what he kind of asked this question, how can we make the most of these ecologies? So how can we think strategically together? How can we kind of group think as organizations? How can we think that actually the boundaries of organizations are actually quite porous, and how can we make them more porous? Is that how you say it? I think actually that's quite a big part of how we do the Just Fact program. So the Blueprint architects, the hubs and the labs, and their connections to a number of different organizations, and the fact that they kind of are working more strategically across each other through the Just Fact program, that they're working in a routine way, speaking to each other, that they're resourced through the program, and kind of developing more of an understanding and awareness of each other, means that we are trying to think about organization ecology within this broad ecology of the food movement within Tower Hamlets. So that's the first one.
Josh, I'm so sorry to do this because we could listen to you for hours, I'm sure, I was going to run out of time. 1 minute warning.
Sure. All right. So just really quickly, the other one is called spade work. Spade work is a term that was actually coined by Ella Baker, who was really the real titan of the civil rights movement. And spade work is kind of the meticulous work of organizing meetings and base building, organizing meetings with community leaders, door to door knocking. That kind of the backbone of relationship building is called spade work, and that's a lot of what we do within the Just Fact program through various projects. And finally, it's quite big. I don't know how to get it in a minute, but structure-based organizing. So Jay McAlevey is a really, really great and prolific labor organizer, and she's popularized this idea of structure-based organizing, where structure is basically a bounded constituency. And really, when you're thinking about organizing, you're trying to turn out people in a community that aren't really engaged with what you're doing. And the most efficient way to do that, and the most successful way to do that, kind of looking at past, is through a structure, and that could be a workplace, it could be a university, it could be a mosque. And the idea here is not replicating self-selecting spaces. So that thing that Natasha spoke about, it's going into territories where people might not care, might disagree, or might not know about what we're doing. And again, this is kind of one of the bread and butter parts of the Just Fact program, is that we're working with structures. Some of the projects and programs are based either out of community structures or next to community structures, and working with community gardens, with local schools on a long basis. So kind of structure-based organizing, although not kind of wholly conscious in the Just Fact program, is kind of informing a lot of what we're doing. So I'll stop there. Sorry, I knew I was going to go over.
No need to apologize. We're all clapping. We're clapping. It was really amazing. Thanks so much, Josh. And there'll be more time to come back to some of what you've said about the blended approach. And I love the term architects. I think that's really amazing in the Q&A. But I just want to make sure that we hear from Sarah's going next, because Sarah from the BFAW is going next. If that's all right.
That's fine, thank you. I was like, am I? Thank you for the invitation to join you and speak today. It's brilliant to see so many people from so many different organisations in attendance, and I'm learning a lot just looking through the chat about some of the different organisations that are out there. I do feel very sheltered, not knowing all of you. The Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union is the largest independent trade union to solely represent food workers throughout the food industry. Those workers that, have been the forgotten key workers of the pandemic, working hard to keep the nation fed, but doing so within the background. And we're incredibly proud to be in full support of the work that Ian Byrne MP has been doing to highlight the need to enshrine the right to food into UK legislation. And of course, his work over in Liverpool with fans supporting food banks. And Elaine Smith, who's now retired, who was an MSP up in Scotland, has also done a lot of work up there that I know is being continued. But as our members are the ones that feed the nation, it was only right that we speak to them about the situation they face and be their voice in both Ian and Elaine's processes to make sure that they're heard, and to ensure that the wider public understand that whilst they may assume that workers in the food industry are protected from the difficulty in accessing affordable, healthy food, the reality is, whilst our members and food industry workers work day and night to ensure there is enough food produced for everyone else, they themselves can often struggle to access the food that they need. And we know hunger in the new UK is not a new problem, and that austerity policies have fueled the rise of Food Bank Britain as living costs have soared, pay has been cut, and the social security safety net has slowly been dismantled. And the last 15 months dealing with the pandemic, we know, has brought into the public domain the hidden daily struggles of many, many people. And I know, looking at some of the organisations in the chat, you will have seen that too. And although we know the true scale of the issue is not definitively known, we do know that it is rising at an alarming rate, and more working people are reliant on food charities to feed themselves and their families. And that's why we need to enshrine the right to food into law. To make decent, nutritious food truly accessible, we need to make it affordable, healthy, safe to eat, and fairly produced by well-paid, unionised, protected staff throughout the food industry. Because long-term benefits of this include improved educational attainment, physical and mental well-being, which in turn reduces costs associated with poor health, and decrease in crime, as well as meaning businesses have happier, healthier workforces. And I'll pop a link in the chat to our Right to Food survey, because some of the findings of that are frankly shocking. 40% of respondents have eaten less than they thought they should have during the pandemic due to a lack of money. 19% told us that there has been a time during the last 15 months where their household had run out of food due to a lack of money. 35% said they had gone without enough food to make sure that others in the house could be fed properly, and 1 in 5 relied on food from a friend or relative to provide meals. And even more reported they were concerned about running out of food. And these are the people that have worked throughout the pandemic feeding the nation. Yet our survey suggests that food insecurity is a significant issue for workers in our industry. And worrying about being able to feed yourself and your family should not be something anyone has to go through, let alone during a global pandemic, where there's been more than enough to worry about, including the COVID risks to individuals and their families when having to work, the uncertainty of work and wages because of the impact of the pandemic, the wider impact of lockdown measures, and also mental health concerns. And the report findings are based on experiences, in the most part, from staff who have not worked from home for the past year. They are from workers who have been going out every day to ensure shelves can be stocked and fridges can be filled. Workers who feel, and I quote, that the pay is terrible everywhere in these roles, but to be honest, it's not enough to cover the bills and food. It's just not good enough. I'm frightened for my job security, and it's hard to juggle work and homeschooling. It's taken its toll on me mentally. And the public just doesn't seem to be aware how many people, even now, don't wear masks, don't distance, don't sanitize their hands, and how we workers don't feel safe serving them. And of course, with the changes coming in just a couple of weeks, that's going to be magnified even further. And there are so many, many more stories. Our report highlights the shameful truth of food poverty in the food industry. No one should go without food in the 6th richest country in the world, yet shamefully too many food workers are struggling to earn enough to purchase the very food that they produce. And the pandemic has shone a light on the real key workers in this country. They're not the bosses, the shareholders, or the millionaires. It's the people on the front line, those struggling to make ends meet whilst propping our country up through the toughest 15 months any of us have ever experienced. And we as a union, and Ian and others, can't allow them to be failed any longer. We can't sit back while people are struggling to survive. So as I mentioned before, the time is right now for food, the right to food to be enshrined in law, for decent, nutritious food to be truly accessible, affordable, healthy, safe to eat, and fairly produced by well-paid, unionised, protected staff throughout the food industry. And we're now going to use the report, as I mentioned, I'll pop a link to it in the chat, to work on what changes need to be made within the food industry to ensure no one producing, delivering, or selling food is in a position where they can't feed themselves and their families. We know this will take some time, but we're determined to force that change. We will use it to mobilise support for our industry with the wider public. The food industry is the biggest manufacturing unit in the UK, yet has been left behind for years when it comes to government investments. Instead, it has been left to employers using the profits that they make, generally leaving a smaller share of that for the workers to increase their terms and conditions and, of course, their wages. And we will use it to organise workers within the industry, empowering them to stand together collectively and demand better because they deserve so much more. Lastly, we will use both of these methods to change the narrative of the food industry, often looked at as low paid, unskilled, somewhere you go to when there's no other option. Because I am proud, as the General Secretary of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, to have worked in the food industry. I am proud to have worked at Greggs, and to be able to continue to support our members within it continues to make me proud on a daily basis. There are many skills needed for the very many different roles within our industry, and it's certainly not an industry that everyone could work in. We will continue to support initiatives like Sheffield Needs a Pay Rise, Leeds Gets Organised, and other like-minded organisations that are bringing communities together to challenge exploitative bosses. To be fair, not just in the food industry, but it definitely feels that's where many of them are, because we know that poorly paid people and exploitative work doesn't just affect you at work. It affects every aspect of your life and the community around you. And I'd really love to make contact with the many organisations on the platform and watching today, doing the work that you're doing, so that we can help and support each other and raise each other up as well. Thank you for listening to me. I'm happy to take any questions at the end, and I'll pop the links in the chat.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be an influx of people wanting to talk to you about that work and hear a bit more about it. But we're just going to move on to our last speaker, which is Dale Cranshaw from the Soil Association. And I think we were meant to be having Louise Shute, who was the Wales Programme Manager for the Food for Life Get-togethers programme that the Soil Association run. But as is the case in this virtual world, the internet has got other ideas. So it's just Dale for now. So over to you, Dale. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cecily, and yeah, apologies from Louise for not being able to join in the end. I'll do what I can to cover on her behalf. But what I'm hoping to cover today is just what we mean by community organising and how we use it within the Food for Life Get-togethers programme. Why building connections and leadership is so important to us. And I'll do my best to tell a bit of a story that Louise would have told around what this focus on food leadership looks like at a community level. So starting with what we mean then, first of all, for those of you who don't know, Food for Life Get-togethers, it's a 4-year National Community Fund funded programme led by the Soil Association and also a partnership of other national organisations, and it's all about bringing people together in communities from different backgrounds or generations to cook, grow and eat good food together. And by good food we mean food that's good for climate, nature and health. We see community organising as an approach which builds communities' power to act on the issues that matter to them. Within Food for Life Get-togethers, we do this by developing connections or relationships between people, developing networks and also developing leadership. But we don't just use a community organising approach, and I really agreed with a lot of what Josh was saying around that importance of the blended approach. And our theory of change combines mobilising and organising together, which has been shown to develop high and sustained levels of civic engagement or activism. And yeah, I would really encourage everyone to seek out that Harry Hann amazing book, which Natasha also referenced, which is called How Organisations Develop Activists, to find out more about this. But how do we use this theory in practice? So we mobilise people to act through mass engagement campaigns and focus support services at community organisers, which build their leadership capacity to hopefully sustain that action beyond that initial mobilised point of action in the longer term. And ultimately our aim is that they become organisers of other organisers and mobilise more people into action. Our mobilisation campaigns, namely Plant and Share in the spring, the Big Lunch in summer, and Cook and Share in the autumn, are accessible entry points into more active food citizenship roles in communities, and aim to sequence actions people can take across the year as a way of building engagement and leadership over time. Get-togethers services or support that we offer aim to provide some of that kind of civic or community infrastructure that organisers need to sustain action over a period of time, and that includes things like networks, but also access to money and those trusted relationships, which has been coming up again and again today. There's a really great local trust piece of research on the importance of community infrastructure and how communities responded to the food challenges associated with COVID, which I'll put a link to in the chat and encourage you to read as well. So why is it important for us to focus on connections and leadership? Well, we believe that friendships and connections are fundamentally important for the Get-togethers programme, because community power results from people coming together within communities, sharing knowledge, skills and resources, and taking action on the issues they care about. In terms of leadership, and we are focusing much more on this, we're about halfway through this 4-year programme now, and we're going to focus much more on leadership development in the next 2 years. And we're actually focusing that around a new service called My Food Community, which is a network for good food leaders to learn, connect and take action on food that's good for climate, nature and health. And we'll take a cohort of up to 50 community organisers through this programme starting in September this year. Applications actually are open at the moment for My Food Community, the first cohort. They close on the 12th of July though, so if you do want to apply, you'll need to be fairly quick about it. I'll put another link to the chat about that. Fundamentally though, we see community power and leadership that we hopefully support and play a part in supporting within the Get-togethers programme as being the lasting legacy of this programme in communities. We know that funded programmes come and go, but by focusing down on those relationships, those connections, building community power and leadership, we hope that will be the lasting legacy that we leave behind. Now, at this point, I would have been handing over to Louise to tell you about how a story about how this approach, what it looks like in practice. And I'm not going to be able to do a very good job without her, and I don't have any notes, but I know that she was going to talk about Jude's story, who's from Trowbridge Pantry. Jude came from a background in music and was fairly new to the third sector and food work. She joined the Food Cardiff network, set up a pantry for her community, and we enabled some of that through a small grant which the Get-togethers programme provided for her to take part in a Plant and Share, where she could share produce out with her community. And she went on then from that sort of initial perhaps mobilised action to start to take more sort of organiser leadership focused action. So she became a veg advocate, and she's now applied to be part of My Food Community, and we're really looking forward to seeing how continued sort of stories and journeys like that develop over the course of the programme. So I'll leave it there, and sorry I couldn't do a very good job of impersonating Louise, but hopefully that gave you a little bit of a flavour of the story that she would have told.
I can actually see that Jude has said Jude is in the house, so Jude is here. Hey Jude. And I think what I'm going to do is maybe elevate Jude. So Jude, I don't know whether you'd want to tell your own story, but you can let me know privately in the chat box, and whilst you decide, I can ask a question of the presenters. So if anyone does have any questions, please continue to put them in the Q&A. We've got just about 10 minutes to answer some of them, so I'm going to give you a minute or so to whack them in. And otherwise, I've got some that I can ask of the panelists myself. So I think what I am going to do is I'm going to ask one about gender, because selfishly, the Sustain team had an internal session with Dr. Elaine Page from the University of Sussex this morning, who explores intersectional food studies, and it was abundantly clear, and that we didn't know it already, but that gender plays a huge role in food, but it's often overlooked in our work. So I just wondered whether from your own organising work, whether you had any reflections on how gender plays into your organising and mobilising work, especially when it comes to unpaid work, which can often fall more on the side of women. So I mean, Sarah, from a union perspective, I'm going to go to you for that first, if that's all right.
This is something that we're in live discussions around at the minute, so it's quite an apt question and an apt time. We've just recently had our first digital annual conference, my first in my new role, and one of the things that we were very clear about was utilising digital platforms and holding fringe meetings for equality groups. And when we were sat around talking to some of our women members, they were saying the difficulty of getting women activists is they have so much to do outside of work. When you finish, your shift finishes at 6 o'clock, for argument's sake, if you're doing a 12-hour shift, you then go home and start your home shift. So then taking responsibility of things in the branch, representing people, looking at health and safety issues, that's something else that that women have got to find time for, whilst also recognising that we're probably not the best as a generally male movement, recognising the issues that women face either. So it's something that we know is an issue. I'm very privileged as a General Secretary to have the support system that I've had to enable me to get to this point. But I'm the first General Secretary that's a woman that our union has ever had in its 135 plus years, in an industry where, it's not far off 50-50 split in membership. It shouldn't have taken that long for there to be a female General Secretary, but I think it's indicative of the situation that we face as a movement. I'm not sure I answered the question, but it's definitely something that we're having discussions about how we change that and how we empower and enable more women to do things. And definitely Zoom and Teams and things like that does remove some of those barriers that, I can't attend conference for a week because I've got caring responsibilities, but I can do it whilst I'm at home on Zoom.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sarah. Incredible that you're the first female General Secretary, considering the links between food and gender. That's crazy. And also, just to confirm, I did mean Dr. Elaine Swan, not Elaine Page. God, words. Josh, Dale, would either of you like to come in on that question from your perspective?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. I think I've only been with Wen for a few months, but my experience and the conversations I've had, kind of what I've come to understand is, one, a lot of the users and members in our services are women, and a lot of food work and a lot of unpaid labor, or I guess what some people call the reproductive labor, the labor that's actually making the household continue, that's making the community continue, is incredibly gendered. And I think when we have this idea of feminist leadership, and part of that is that we don't shy away from conversations around that. So when there is a community space and women are coming together and talking about their experiences of food, and it is incredibly gendered how that labor falls, then conversations are had. And actually, I think the other thing is that, spade work, that thing that we mentioned before, good spade work should be things that actually change people's lives. They should be intervening in people's lives and making other possibilities seem possible. And I think that, and from like glimpses that I've seen, like that means that it can also intervene in spaces of social reproduction. So it's like, how can we think communally about how food preparation happens, how food growing happens? And yeah, so I think yeah, it's absolutely a really fundamental question. I've met Elaine Swan and she's definitely impressed that upon me even further. And I think we have a long way to go, but I think, yeah, it's something that we're always talking about and thinking about in our community spaces.
Yeah, and I think both you and Sarah have talked about kind of, we haven't answered the question, but I think it's, can we answer the question, or I think there's a lot to do about just raising it in forums like this, so that we're aware rather than trying to come up with all of the solutions immediately. Dale, would you like to add anything? And then we've got one more question that we'll go to.
Sure, just quickly, I think it is a really good challenge, and and I'm really pleased that you raised it, because actually it made me challenge myself in terms of how we sort of look at different identities within the programme at the moment. And whilst we talk about bringing people from different backgrounds together, and we do kind of have measures around different minority communities and what we mean by people from different backgrounds within that. Overall, across the whole programme, we also have focused on making sure that we're trying to distribute the resources of the programme towards deprived communities. So we have an overall measure on using the index of multiple deprivation to ensure that we're reaching the deprived communities with people who we mobilise and who we organise with. Just conscious that really we don't cut at the moment. We don't necessarily measure, how that relates to gender, and so it's a really good challenge and point for us to take away, I think, to go and analyze that and see how it plays through in terms of who we're engaging with, and then perhaps having more conversations like this so that we can bring it to the top of the agenda.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Thanks so much, Dale. I'm aware of time, but I think there's an important question in the Q&A that I just want to get to. Elizabeth Westaway, your question is fabulous. I'm going to ask the panelists to answer that one in written format or to contact you, because you very kindly put your contact details in the chat box. But Gainer's question was, at the end of the day, isn't it mainly middle-class white people organising the lower working class in all of these organisations presenting today, apart from the Bakers Food Allied Workers Union? And I just want to give, I think the focus of this session was how we're building diverse movements. So I want to be able to give you a chance to kind of comment on whether you think that's the case and what you're doing to make sure that isn't the case, and it's from a grassroots perspective. So Dale, I know you just spoke, but I'm going to go to you first, if that's all right.
Sure. So like just building on what I was just saying, really, one of the things that we do is we regularly measure where the people we're reaching are coming from and who we're working with, which communities they're from, and we use the index of multiple deprivation, IMD, data across the UK to do that, and then we review that on a quarterly basis to see are we actually the methods that we're putting in place to try and ensure that we are thinking about equity in our work, essentially, and making sure that we're reaching people with the greatest needs, with the resources that we're lucky enough to have to distribute in the programme. So, for example, with our small grants, we specifically, I don't know the exact figures offhand, Louise actually leads this piece of work, she would have been able to talk to it, but I think it's over sort of 60% that go to the top 10, 20 or 30% most deprived communities in the UK, and we also try to sort of use our national profile as an opportunity to give a platform to people from different communities and diverse communities, to share their own leadership and expertise as being the experts, not putting ourselves as we're the ones with the answers, but putting forward giving our platform to other people to be able to talk about their issues, how they're organising around those and the solutions that they found, and trying to use our position to support a diverse group of people into the movement.
Thanks very much, Dale. Thank you. And then Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of to start with, I'm not a white middle class person, and I'm in an organization that's here. But I think it's a bit, and this is just my personal opinion, I think it's a bit more complicated. I think first of all, we should complicate how we think about middle class. People band about the term sometimes to just mean like, yeah, a person who might have two professional parents who earn work, or they might mean it for someone who has a little trust fund and a flat. And actually, we have a lot of middle class people in our communities, or aspiring middle class, lower middle class people who just breach the middle class, and actually they're going to be in our community and they're very important. And actually, even like we could take that a bit further and say, okay, how do we, if we're talking about gendered labor in the community, we had a conversation really recently about like, how can we talk more about class? I think sometimes that conversation can happen in a way where it makes people feel like they have to self-flagellate, or they shouldn't be in the space, they should take themselves out so that we can get the numbers balanced. But what the conversation could also be like, let's talk about class. Sometimes that appears in the way that people are time poor. Actually, a lot of time we're talking about people being time poor and cash poor. So if you're middle class and you have some more time, maybe we can use that time to be able to undercut the gendered nature of labor in the community. So people who have more time can be more cooking and doing school trips and actually help other people free up time. So actually, I think we should talk about how we leverage privilege. And I think being pragmatic means that, it's not about having less middle class people. I think like I look at lots of movements that have organized working class communities, especially like Black working class communities in America and stuff. And a lot of those did have middle class or like white organizers that were kind of lower middle class. And the point is, are they trying to develop leaders in that community? If they're just trying to like take care of themselves and have more of their own people there, that's different to if they're actually coming in and trying to develop leaders in the communities. So I think it's a very complex and nuanced conversation. And I don't think it's just like less middle class, more working class. Always more working class, but actually I think we need to be a bit nuanced about it. My own personal opinion, not when.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Josh. Yeah, the nuances, the complexities around it, it's not such an easy one. Sarah, any final thoughts to add there?
Sorry, I was just typing answers into the answer boxes as everybody was speaking. I think it's difficult. I don't think I've got anything else to add around what Dale and Joshua have said around class and middle class and lower class. I think sometimes we get caught up in that, and people maybe get pushed out of things that they could help make change with because they're from a different class or perceived to be from a different class. And I think, whether you're working class or middle class, we're definitely not the elite 1%, and we should all be working together and utilising the skills, the knowledge, the experience that we've got and supporting each other to raise each other up, not dividing each other and doing the 1%'s work for them.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much, Sarah. We're all in it together. We can all unite to push for change. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. We are 5 minutes over. I know there's more questions in the Q&A and we could go on for another half an hour, but I think I am going to pull it to a close just for respect for the speaker's time. So thank you so much, everyone that's been able to come today. As I said, it has been recorded, so all of this will be available on the Sustain website, and I will share it via Eventbrite email as well, so you have it and you can share it far and wide. Lots of has been shared in the chat, including emails, so I'm going to keep this space open so you can just get emails and have a quick look at the Q&As, but please, thank you so much to all of our speakers, Dale, Sarah, Josh and Louise, and Natasha, even though we weren't able to hear from Louise. And yeah, please, if you have any additional thoughts, feel free to email the Sustain team and we'll pass them on. And thank you, everyone. speakers. I know that you probably have other things to be doing, but